Now, let me just say that's more than a quarter of a century. I'm a little older than that. But it's a real... Okay. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all this evening. I've heard a lot about the Blackburn Institute and the Nix lectureship, and I'm very honored to be a part of this distinguished group. I wanted to talk a little bit this evening about some of the things that really shaped my own life and my own philosophy. You know, I was one of those people who kind of knew what I wanted to do from very early on. Medicine was always the thing that interested me. If there was ever a story on television or on the radio about medicine, I was right there, just like a magnet. I even like going to the doctor's office. But, you know, the thing that really caught my attention was church. You know, in Sabbath school, they frequently had stories on about missionary doctors. And these were people who at great personal expense traveled all over the world to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. They seemed to me like the most noble people on the face of the earth. And I decided when I was 8 years old that I was going to be a missionary doctor. And that was my dream until I was 13, at which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out, and psychiatrist was in. Now, I didn't know any psychiatrists, but on television, they seemed like rich people. You know, they drove Jaguars, lived in the big fancy mansions, big plush offices, and all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. And, you know, it seemed like I was doing that anyway, so I said, you know, this is going to work out extremely well. And I started reading Psychology Today. I was the local shrink in high school. Everybody brought me their problems. I would stroke my chin, say, tell me about your mama. And then I even majored in psychology in college, did advanced psych in medical school. I was gung-ho. I mean, I was going to be the world's greatest psychiatrist. And then I started meeting a bunch of psychiatrists. Need I say more? Nah, I'm just kidding. Some of my best friends are psychiatrists. But what I discovered very quickly is that what psychiatrists do on television and what they do in real life are two very different things. And actually what they do in real life is considerably more important than what they do on television. They're some of the more intellectual members of the medical community. But it just wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had to say, now what? And I said, well, what are you really, really good at? You see, I believe that God gives everybody special gifts. And I stopped and analyzed my own gifts, and I realized that I had a lot of eye-hand coordination. I was a very careful person, never knocked things over and said, oops, which is a good characteristic for a brain surgeon, by the way. I could think and see in 3 dimensions, and I love to dissect things. That coupled with a love of the brain, I said, you would be a natural in neurosurgery. Now, some people thought that that was kind of a strange occupation for me because at that time there had only ever been 8 black neurosurgeons in the world. But, you know, I never really stopped to think about things like that. I stopped and I thought about, where do you fit? And it turned out to be a very excellent choice for me. You know, I started out as an adult neurosurgeon, but I very quickly learned that no matter how good an operation you do on those chronic back pain patients, they never get any better until they get their settlement. Whereas, whereas with children, you know, what you see is what you get. You know, when they feel good, you know they feel good. When they feel bad, you know they feel bad. And, you know, here's the thing. You know, you can operate on a kid for 12, 14, 16 hours. And if you're successful, your reward may be 40, 50, 60 years of life. Whereas with an old geezer, you spend all that time operating and they die in 5 years of something else. So, you know, I like to get a big return on my investment. And I'm just kidding, I like old people. But actually, I'm one of them now. But, and actually, a large part of my practice now involves a condition that affects primarily older people. It's called trigeminal neuralgia. Very, very painful condition of the face. Used to be called the suicide disease. The pain was so bad. And we have the ability to get rid of that pain. And I'll tell you, there is nothing like seeing somebody who had their life just turned upside down and to be able to do a procedure and all of a sudden they have their life back. And really, you know, that's what medicine is all about, being able to intervene at times like that and make a difference. Now, before I go any further, I want to take just a brief moment for a disclaimer. You know, everybody makes disclaimers these days. Have you noticed that? You know, I belong to this board, or, you know, I'm associated with this group, and therefore you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Well, what I have noticed in recent years is that it's now virtually impossible to speak to a large group of people without offending someone. Have you noticed that? You know, when I was a kid, you know, they used to say, sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't think the kids know that anymore. They don't hear that phrase anymore because everybody walks around with their feelings on their shoulders, waiting for somebody to say something. And then they get, did you hear that? And then they can't hear anything else you say. I remember once I was talking to a group about the difference between a human brain and a dog's brain. And a man got offended. He said, you can't talk about dogs like that. And then another time I was talking to a group about how the fashion industry has gotten the young ladies to think they're supposed to be so skinny. They look like they escaped from a concentration camp. And a Jewish man got offended. He said, you can't mention concentration camps. That's way too sensitive. It would be as if I said something to you about slavery. I said, you can talk about slavery all you want. It doesn't bother me. But, you know, some people just choose to get offended. So this is my disclaimer. It is not my intention to offend anyone here this evening. And if anyone is offended, too bad. Because I got to tell you, I don't really believe in political correctness. And in fact, I actually think it is a very destructive force that is in the process of ruining our nation. I talk about this a lot in my latest book, America the Beautiful. But think about this. A lot of the people who founded this nation came here trying to escape from people who tried to tell you what you could think and what you could say. And here we are reintroducing it through the back door. Exactly the same thing. And it's absolutely absurd. And really, the emphasis should not be on unanimity of speech and unanimity of thought. The emphasis should be on learning how to be respectful of people with whom you disagree. And if we would begin to do that, then we could begin to have intelligent, rational dialogue. How can you have real dialogue when you can't even say what you believe? You can't even say what you mean. You have a necessarily artificial conversation. And our society is now full of artificial conversation. And it's one of the reasons that we are making very little progress. And it's something that I think people are going to have to get excited about once again, recognizing that, you know, our society is changing quite dramatically right now. There is a very secular segment that is trying to change the nature of our society. And they have employed political correctness as a means to mute discussion on what's being done. And the only way it can be combated is that people have to learn how to speak up. Because there are few people with microphones and podiums who impose their will on the rest of people, to the point that in this nation, where all of our coins and all of our bills say, "In God we trust," we are afraid to say Merry Christmas. I mean, how did that happen? And the only way that kind of thing happens is when vast majority of people allow themselves to be controlled